So welcome back to the Defiant Spirit, and well, today I'm not sure it's Wealth 360, but we're going to partner up anyways with my partner in crime in wealth, Michael Feiner. Hey, Michael.
Good afternoon, B. I love you.
So
I love your new coat.
thanks. This is my casual Colorado look. So
Yes, so it's casual, cold in Colorado look.
it's a little bit cold here, but it's always sunny. That's a nice thing about Colorado, even if it's cold. You guys can't always say the same thing up in New England.
It's supposed to be cold next week. Legitimately cold. So
Yeah, it's pretty cool. When snow falls in Colorado, it's usually melted certainly off the streets within 24 hours because it's always sunny. It's almost always sunny.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. I remember back in New England, it would fall in like November and go away in about May,
Pretty much.
June.
And well, the worst part is how dirty it gets, right? Because it's here so long, the snow becomes brown and black and disgusting. That's when you that's when you know you're ready to have spring come when the snow is dark.
That's when you're ready to open an office in Naples.
That's why we go to Naples.
That's
And as
right.
you
So
said, I maybe have to do an office in Denver. I actually like that idea.
we're going to talk about that offline. We're
Denver,
going to
I like that.
expand our Wealth 360 footprint
Yeah,
into Florida, into Colorado. It's already established in New England. So
yeah.
But today we have a surprise for our listeners. We aren't talking necessarily about wealth. Maybe it'll morph into a conversation. But in fact, we are talking about this slide on the screen, Ted Lasso. So we're going to be coming back to that. First, I'm going to zoom in because I got, I don't know if a complaint, a constructive criticism saying they'd like to see us in the shot as much as any slide we're showing. So I'll go back to that.
Really?
Yeah, they said they
Oh,
want your mug,
who is that? My mother?
your
Oh,
mother. She said,
my
yeah,
mother called you?
a
Yeah.
little more Mick in the picture would be
Yeah.
nice. So we're going to talk Ted Lasso. Well, first of all, I guess big picture. I mentioned it in our previous podcast on Enneagram 5. Why are we talking Ted Lasso? I mean, Michael's a financial expert. I'm an Enneagram expert. We bring these two things together. That makes sense. We talk about wealth through the lens of Enneagram, but the truth is, we can talk about anything under the sun through the lens of the Enneagram. Enneagram is a roadmap for life. And so I have found that it makes sense to talk about it, through the lens of investment, through the lens of leadership, through the lens of lots of different things, but nothing more relevant, frankly, than talking about it through the lens of culture, of media, of movies, of TV shows.
Well, it's so poignant. It's easy to analogize with a TV show because everyone understands. I love this one. Although I loved your yellow. I love. We didn't do a show on Yellowstone, but I loved your Yellowstone. We should do a show on Yellowstone.
We're going to revisit Yellowstone.
Let's do that.
I refuse to do a couple shows. Like I won't do The Crown. I don't care what you say, Michael. I'm not doing The Crown.
Yeah, everyone's a one, so don't worry.
It's not a lot of diversity, right?
Right. There's not a lot. There's not a lot to talk about there. And if they are, they're in trouble.
So, yeah, so we'll wait till the Meghan Markle, Prince Harry documentary comes
Yeah.
out. Maybe we'll do it on that. But yeah, I think we're going to do Yellowstone. We're open to suggestions for those of you listening. One of the reasons why I just like doing it through TV shows or movies is because it brings to life some of these things that, the numbers that we're throwing around. You can see it, and then you can watch the TV show and feel like you're not totally just wasting time. You're also doing some research, R&D. So we're going to look at Ted Lasso. Let's start out before we jump into the Enneagram types. What did this show do for you? Did you like it? Obviously, you liked it. Why'd you like it?
Yeah, I did love the show. I came to it a little bit later than some people,
Mm-hmm.
as people said, "Hey, you got to watch Ted Lasso," and I said, "Well, what's it about?" And it was sort of like Game of Thrones when they told me it was about. I'm like, I'm not into that type of thing, so I don't want to watch it. And then one day I was desperate on a plane, and I said, I'll watch it, and fell in love with how clever it was and what it was about, and whatnot.
I'm exactly like you. I think it also speaks to our Enneagram types. Michael's a 3, an achiever. I'm an 8, a challenger. And if I'm going to watch something, usually it's going to be along those lines where it's going to be a little more aggressive. Probably got to have some blood and violence involved for me as an 8. Um, I like action.
Right, there you go.
I like battlefield stuff. And so for me to watch it was a little bit of a stretch, probably not so different for you.
Yeah, for me, I like to watch documentaries. I like to watch biographies. I like to watch, nonfiction when I can.
Mhm.
I don't read a lot of fiction, and I don't, but again, breaking out of my type, I'm like, wow, I loved it. So I've got to break my three habits. So
Yeah, three's all about efficiency.
yeah, the show is a what? If you had to say the show, what if you just had to say what is the show? What's the Enneagram of the show?
Well, I think because it is all about Ted Lasso and the people, sort of exist around him. He's the sun, S-U-N, and they're all revolving around him. So I would say it's what he is, and I think he's a two.
Okay, yeah,
Um,
that makes sense.
but
The show is
I've
kind of a two.
Yeah, but I've heard it argued that he's a seven, and we're going to talk. There's no clear, definitive, he's this. I think he's a two, but I could hear the case that he was a seven. So it's either a two or a seven.
Yeah,
Um,
makes sense. And the show's like that. It is an uplifting,
mhm.
positive show, and I can see that twos and sevens are kind of uplifting people, right? Or they're generally
Yeah,
try to
positive.
be positive, right?
So they're part of a particular triad where they're called the outlook, a positive outlook, 2, 7, and 9.
Yeah,
And so you see that 2, 7, and 9 have a positive outlook. And so I imagine most comedies are 2, 7, 9-ish, right? 4 is going to be a little more, if you're drama, dark thing. 5 is
yeah.
going to be like scary Stephen King stuff. But yeah, 2, 7, or 9, definitely the positive outlook. But that's one of the reasons why I didn't watch it, because I'm not positive outlook. I don't like sunny and light and funny. Naturally, normally. Now I can defy that. Hey, that's part of what we're talking about here, defying your numbers. So I had to start it, I think, 3 different times before I could actually get going into
Oh,
it.
really?
And by the third or fourth time of watching the same episode, finally something clicked. And it became deeply moving to me. I can't even explain how moving it was.
Yeah, there's maybe it is one of those shows, and that you have to pay attention to. And I was the same way. I think started on the plane. I said it's kind of good. I'll pick it up. I didn't finish it. And then when I went home and finished it, maybe it was at the end of the first episode that it struck me also, and I realized there was a lot more to this, and I kind of needed to get to the next episode. And it does have this sublime theme, right? That tugs at you.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I think that so many people have been taken with this show, to the point where I've been to a couple services, like religious services, where the rabbi has spoken about Ted Lasso. One of them was a high holiday sermon around
Oh
Ted
my,
Lasso. And
wow.
this was before I was into it, and I'm like, oh, give me a break. Like, really? Like, this is your, and now I get it. Now we're gonna have some spoiler alerts, I imagine, just because there's no way to talk about it without it. So anybody listening, we'll try and say spoiler alert so you can put your fingers in your ears. But um, I think one of the reasons why people like this is because it is light and it is funny, but then there's this depth to it that you can understand, where some of the humor is built as a defense mechanism around some painful issues. And my brother calls me and says, B, I know you're watching, because I talked to him about it. He says, I know you're watching it, but just be prepared in season 2. It's going to hit really close to home. And
Oh,
so it hit
yeah.
really close to home for
Oh,
me.
I forgot about all that. That's right. I
Yeah.
mean, my God, I mean,
And so there's this
not
moment
even
that
really
was,
close. I mean, you were the Wizard of Oz, and the house fell on the witch. And I
yeah,
mean,
it
season two
was the home.
is the home, right? And you don't see that coming.
No, that's the
That's the
point, right?
thing. That's why you hit by the home. I mean, there's no way you can anticipate season two from
Right.
anything in season one. I don't think.
Well, let's get into it,
Maybe,
because I think
maybe,
you
yeah,
can. I
maybe.
think you
Okay,
can
of course you
anticipate it.
can. How come I can't? You can.
Well, I couldn't either, because I was caught off guard. But my brother, but
He.
now that I know the Enneagram, I know there's a light and there's a shadow, and we have both of them. And sometimes when the 9, 2, and well, this is a good starting point. 9, 2, and 7. The 9 is the peacemaker. For those who are listening, I have a slide up with all of the at least major characters in Ted Lasso on the Enneagram picture. If you're not watching, you don't have to watch. You can just email me and I'd be happy to get you the slide. For those watching, you can see as well as I can that we have the types on here. Well, the 9, the peacemaker, the 2, the helper, and the 7, the enthusiast, are all positive outlook, but they also do that at times to cover up some of the darker stuff in their lives. And I
Okay.
see this working with clients who are 7, 2s, and 9s. When you start to dig a little deeper, you start to realize some of that's a defense mechanism because they don't always want to go deep into the stuff that season 2 was probably covering up in season 1.
That is, I mean, boy, you're hitting me with something very deep there, that insight, right? The lighthearted, happy, enthusiastic helpers, like you said, might have something deeper that, is a defense mechanism psychologically. So that's interesting that you say that. Clearly it's true with Ted Lasso, but it's interesting to know as you're dealing with relationships, whatever they may be, that because you've always told me, be careful if it's too, something you've told me that has stuck with me in my notes, because I take notes when B talks to me. It's like Dalai Lama giving you, and sometimes you don't even know it for a while, but it struck me probably months after he told me. He said, you're in trouble with a 2 if they're complimenting you too much.
Right.
Now, you don't maybe remember telling me that.
I
And I was
remember
like,
saying
well,
it. Yeah.
he said, be careful about that because that's a defense it could be, there. And I think it's applicable to Ted Lasso, probably the reason I mentioned it. But I've learned a lot from you in that sense. And I can see it now in Ted Lasso that, if you're a helper, if you're 2, be careful when they're over complimenting or over helping or that type of thing. There might be more trouble than you think.
So a 2 when they're in that complimentary mode, and in a 9 when they're in the head nodding yes, and they're saying yes, and you're not supposed to really trust the yes of a 9 because inside they may be saying no, but they're not voicing it. And a
Right.
7 when they're laughing, when there's too many jokes, when it's too unserious, because each one of those seems positive on the surface. Again, only when somebody's in reaction, when they're unconscious, when they're unhealthy, they might be using it as a strategy, as a defense strategy, because we're getting too close to something real, darker, deeper, painful.
I think you just summarized maybe the emotional background of the show,
Yeah. Season
right?
1, season 2.
It really is. Season 1 is one Enneagram, and season 2 is kind of a different one. I mean, they're completely different, dark and light, right? Or yin and yang. Would that
Yep.
be a way to put it?
Yeah. And then also on the Enneagram, you can see 2 is connected to 4. 4 is a darker energy type.
Yeah.
And 7 is connected to 5. 5 is a darker, 7 is a lighter. 4 is a darker, 2 is a lighter. And 9 sits on top, and beneath it is 4 and 5. So each one of these has a positive and a negative, a light and a shadow. And it's not that we should live in one or the other. We need both. 4s need to look more 2-ish, 5s need to look more 7-ish, and vice versa. So you're going to see characters in this TV show that in some ways I think pair up because they're almost yin yang. So let's get into some of the characters. I guess it make most sense to start with Ted. Would you say that's the starting point? Or should we save him for the last? I don't know.
I could flip a coin on that. I'll let you,
I guess we'll start and finish with Ted because
Okay.
we just described, and maybe that's a good segue because anybody listening, first of all, these are caricatures. This is Hollywood's version, although I do think they consult an Enneagram expert. And if not, give me a call, Hollywood, because there's a lot of truth in the way they're presenting characters, but they're extremes sometimes. The other thing is, every Enneagram type is complex. And so you're going to see the complexity of each type. And let's start with the lighter side of Ted. So describe to us Ted, and maybe Higgins as well. I wasn't sure. He could have been a 6. Why would I make the case for Ted as a 2? Or why would you make the case, Mick, for Ted as a 2?
Well, I think Ted he appears certainly in season 1, and initially very agreeable,
Mm-hmm.
very helpful, very friendly, very lighthearted.
Mm-hmm.
and finally very humble.
Okay.
It's about other. It's about other, and what you've taught me about twos. It's about other people, not about themselves. And I think in season one he projects that. It's about his teams. Hey, we all know this is about a soccer team, or for our European audience, the football team, but it's about soccer, and it's all about everyone on the soccer team. It's all about his previous football coaching experience, that he puts everyone else first.
Yeah, and I think you're right to kind of say that's one of the defining differences that puts him in the two camp, because those some people say he's a seven, but sevens are not other referencing; they're self-referencing. They It's not selfish or that twos are selfless, but their orientation to the world for twos is other. What's happening around me, versus sevens, what's happening in me. And so sevens tend to look a little more selfish and twos tend to look a little more selfless. But I think that's a starting point of how he ends up in a two versus a seven. And it's relationship, relationship, relationship. Ted is all about relationships.
Yeah.
Sevens can be about relationship, but they tend to be more about the experience, fun, right? Experiencing the world. Nothing wrong with it. Ted feels to me like it really begins and ends around relationships. Certainly, it's a constant throughout both seasons.
Clearly, I think you're completely on point on that.
Now, Ted, I do, we're not deep into subtypes here yet in this conversation, but I will say I put below, just to give everybody an understanding what that is, their subtype as far as I could understand it. And so SO means social. And then I put in there, he's a two with a W, which stands for wing, and a one. Now, I have very definitive views on wings, and I don't think we're one wing or the other. Wings are the numbers on either side of your core type. So his core type is a two, and his wing would either be a one or a three. I'm of the school of thought that says you have two numbers on either side because you have two wings. The wings are secondary. You can draw upon them pretty easily. Some people will say you lean one way or the other. And since it's kind of the lingo out there, I put in there, if he leans in a direction, it's going to be towards the one. So he's a two that has a lot of oneness. And we'll get into one when we get to Rebecca. So two wing one. Again, too deep probably for this conversation, but I want people to know what you're looking at when you're looking at the slides. So he's a two, a helper. He's relationship oriented. Now Higgins, I have in there, he's a secondary character, but I do think he plays a support role in a lot of people's lives in the show, and that's why I put him into a two. What do you think about that one?
No, I think he isn't. That's the beauty of, I guess, a show like this, or kind of the best shows, that there's so many good characters, and you need these characters, even just for contrast to the other characters, or to you need that. You need a Higgins for Rebecca, and it helps define her for the contrast, right?
Yep.
And I would agree. The wing part of it, I think he's a two. It's hard. I was almost thinking he could be a wing three, because he's kind of ambitious in the sense of trying to move up the ladder. But clearly, I would agree. They're two birds of a feather, him and Ted. Ironically,
I think that's a great case. Thank you for moving him over to two wing three. If we're going to attach one, because he's a coach, first of all. He's ambitious up to a point, though. You see this in the show where his ambition is almost questioned a few times, even by the other coaches.
Yeah. He's not merciless ambitious in the sense of, not the way you've defined. Of course, the threes always get the bad rap, and I'm looking at the two threes that you did, so I'm like, okay, I can see where this is going.
Always throw the threes under the bus.
The bus. You back the bus. This is the backing of the bus. It's not
Over
even
and over again. Yes.
Yeah, you couldn't. Yeah.
I think Ted leans to the one because there is this sort of moral code with ones.
Yeah. True.
That really does feel. Now, again, threes might be more moral than a one, but we're talking about how they navigate the world and make sense of it. And it feels to me like Ted leans very heavily on that one. And understandably, again, here comes the spoiler, and I'm saying it outright, because in season 2, you find out that his father committed suicide, killed himself.
Oh yeah, no question. I mean, that's obviously a seminal the seminal event, his, aside from, spoiler alert, his divorce.
Right.
You think that's the worst thing that's coming,
Right.
but you realize, because that seems like the thing that's, he's a family man, he's traditional, he's a helper, and he's gets divorced, right? And
Mhm.
that really affects him because his view of the world.
Mhm.
And you can see how affected he is. And then you realize when, his father's suicide, his whole, the security issues that he has are just deep.
And so one is all about creating a structure. They
Right.
need structure in their lives. And I experienced this after my father killed himself. I was a grown man, but I saw this especially with my younger brother, who was 16, I think, when my father took his own life, and Ted was 16, and in the show when he said when his father took his own life. So my brother was deep. We both were deeply hit by it, but my brother especially. My brother's a one, and I could see that framework of the one shattered, right? And so ones are all about creating a structure and having stability. And so you can imagine it hits different types in different ways. And so that one piece is very strong in Ted. And I think he's built a moral code and structure and rigor and discipline to survive after that. And so that two-wing one is very strong in Ted. Higgins is more of a support role. It's interesting because a lot of the best supporting actors and actresses are twos in real life. Like Sally Field is an example. A lot of character actors are twos. They're the types who don't want the spotlight traditionally. They would like to defer it to the threes. And that'll move us over to the threes, your favorite. And I think that Ted has a lot of that two second support role, even though he's head coach. And it gets him, by the way, into some trouble not taking on the lead role, the spotlight when people want him and need him to. So Enneagram 3. Tell us a little bit about the achiever since you know him so well.
Yes, I am a 3. I'm scanning here for a better example of a 3 in this group of 20, and of course I can't find one except for
Jamie Hart turns it around by season 2. Come on.
I know, but he's still, both of these characters are characters we hate.
At
That
first.
is a spoiler alert. And they're both ruthless, and they're both merciless, and they're both, kind of I would say bad people in the show. And so with that, thank you. I'm a 3. And but a 3, you know, and tends to seek achievement and seek status, and image, and is very image conscious. And you're an unhealthy 3, as I think these two are for Jamie and for Rupert. You do that at the expense of others, and at the expense of potentially morals, and the expense of a lot of things if you're unintegrated and unhealthy. So, but Jamie, in the show, as a spoiler alert, is seeking fame and seeking his upward mobility. Doesn't care about the team, doesn't care about other people, doesn't even care about his fiance.
Mhm.
So he's all about self, and I think that's probably the defining thing that I work on as a 3. Is you don't want just to be about yourself, and at all costs.
So, just if people know you and then they look at these two, they go, ah, man, that's so different. First of all, Michael has done a tremendous amount of work in his life. So he's very responsive, not reactive. But secondly, you're a self-preservation 3, which kind of mutes the 3-ness and makes you a little more 2-ish. So there's some subtype differences. But I just want to take Jamie as an example because, yeah, Rupert's a schmuck at the beginning and the end of the thing.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I probably could have put him in the 8 category. Sometimes it's hard for me to tell if they're 3s or 8s because there's a lot of similarities, but we can talk about the differences. But Jamie is a reactive, unhealthy 3 at the beginning. And by the end, spoiler alert, I give you a little pauses so you can push pause. He in the final shot, one of the final, maybe it was the final episode, he passes the ball, which for Jamie was unheard of at the beginning. And
right.
at the end, he's a teammate. He's a team player. He apologizes. He's kind, at least as kind as he can be. So there's some growth in that process. And I walked around for like 3 weeks afterwards going, Jamie, tut, 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 Jamie, tut, tut, tut. So that's stuck in my
I
head.
think that's, the takeaway that you've taught me in this system is why are we even doing this? It's
Mhm.
the growth. If you can reflect and figure out, where you are, and you can figure out where you want to be, you can grow, and you can
Defy your
improve
number.
in the areas that you need and evolve, right?
That's right.
And
That's right.
Jamie, yeah, Rupert didn't, at least not yet. And maybe season 3 he will, but Jamie certainly did. Not that he's going to win an Academy Award for his improvement, but it was enough where he became less hateful
That's
and a
right.
better person. Um, and as a transformational character, and I'm looking at all these people, there's certain people who went from good to bad, and we'll talk about Nate probably in
Mm-hmm.
that sense. Jamie went from badder to gooder, if that's for lack of a better crappy English. But there was a transformation in those two. When I looked at those two characters in particular,
Yes.
of personality. So it's interesting to see and track
Well,
that possibility.
but I think Ted and Higgins, Higgins really, twos tend to give away the spotlight, as I've mentioned. And part of the growth journey of a two is to take back their power, their voice, which is why you see a line between 2 and 8. Twos tend to need to grow and be more like 8 in that way of having strength and belief in self. And so you can see Higgins starts standing up for himself. And then Ted, he really follows that 4. That's maybe a segue into the 4 because he deepens and he kind of gets past that surfacey slapstick, can't be real, can't go deep, wouldn't go deep with Dr. Feldstone, and finally starts to do some inner work. And he really follows that 2 line down into the 4. And so really lots of these characters are growing from their one side of their, Enneagram type to the higher side. So Enneagram 4, I don't have much to say about Nora. I'm not even 100% sure she's down here, but Enneagram 4 is it's just a depth of character, of quality, of emotion. 4s really are comfortable in getting into
Mhm.
emotion and dealing in it. And you could feel that with Nora. She almost feels like when she's hanging out with her mom, who's sassy up at the 7, almost like she's the parent. Like there's a
Yeah, for
depth to
sure,
this little
for
girl.
sure.
Yeah. And so I think Ted really kind of follows that 4 line down and does some inner work. 4s are all about inner work. And so that's part of Ted's growth path is this 4. I don't anything to say about Nora? You want to jump into the 5s?
Yeah, I think you've covered it nicely. I
Okay.
can't really add a lot
So
to
she's
Nora.
kind of like a third tertiary character. Okay. Now these 5s, I wasn't 100% sure. Let's start with the most important one, Coach Beard.
I think you're spot on with Coach Beard. I mean, he's quintessential. I think in the sense of
Tell us about
quiet.
why.
He's a quiet thinker,
Hmm.
pure and simple. And I agree with the wing, and he's loyal, second in command to Ted,
Hmm.
and nothing's going to phase his thinking ever.
So I grappled with 9. There is a kind of a peaceful reservedness to him. But there's also this analytical piece that almost trumped it because the 9s I know aren't quite as analytical. They're quiet, they're reserved, they want to build bridges. And 5s can do the same thing, but it's coming more at the end of the day from an intellectual. Well, our last podcast, Mick, we talked about the 5 investor as a conservationist.
Right.
And it's not just
He,
money, it's like conservation of energy. Go ahead.
well, so he would probably score as a 9. Those are the feelers, right? 9.
9s are less
No,
feeling type.
think, act, and no. They're
Oh,
you do the think, act, and
feel, yeah. So
is it
think like a 5, act like a 9.
act
And
like a 9. Excuse me. So I think you're right. He acts like a 9. I think he would, in your excellent algorithms of how you analyze these, I would suspect that he would come out as a think like a 5, but act like a 9, exactly like you're saying, because he does act that way. He doesn't ever do anything that, except maybe I won't be a spoiler on a couple of fun little scenes in season 2, but he makes the peace. He doesn't cause waves. He um, isn't one to upset the apple cart.
Yeah, and he's even extremely uncomfortable when in those situations. You can tell.
Exactly. You
Yeah,
can't get a reaction out of him almost, no matter what you
right.
do, right? So I think you're exactly right.
The scene that did it for me though, to put him into five, was when he was playing mental chess with his girlfriend.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
knight to rook three or whatever, and I was like, geez, that's five-ish all over him. So we'll call him a five.
yeah. And that's why he's the wingman for Ted to probably think about things more than Ted. Ted does things more emotionally, doesn't he?
Totally,
And Coach Beard doesn't.
absolutely,
He's anti-emotional almost.
almost
He's
appears
the
that
most
way.
emotional person on the entire show.
And it's interesting because one of the key types of dating relationships in the Enneagram world are twos and fives, because they counterbalance each other. Because a five needs the two's access to their heart, and a two needs the five's access to their analytics. And so they really complement each other. And so they were not married in the show, but they're best friends
They
and coaches.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's their work marriage, I suppose, if
Yes.
you want to, for
Yes.
lack of a better, you know, analogy.
Absolutely. And Dr. Feldstone is
Oh,
5-4 crossover, deep
yeah,
withholding emotion. That's why I put her into the five, but really,
yeah,
just gotta work to get inside to her heart. So she's probably the most five-ish of all the characters that I could think of.
yeah. Now that you mention that, that's probably I can see that now.
And Ted turns to her and draws upon her for that strength. He, in some ways, grounds her, just like Coach Beard. It's not coincidental that those are probably those, and then Rebecca, we'll get to, are the most important figures in Ted's life in the show. So, and then Trent Krim from The Independent, wasn't 100% sure, but he felt very like
No,
calculated.
yeah, no, he is a report. He's the reporter, right?
Yeah,
So
investigator.
makes a lot of sense. Investigative reporter. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
there was even a scene where he didn't want to report on something. I think it was Ted's panic attack or something, and but he said it's my job. Right, that felt very five-ish. So,
right, yeah,
um,
that is true.
so I like this conversation about Nate a lot. We're moving over to six. I put him as a loyalist. We'll talk about what that means, but I wasn't sure because he felt like he had a lot of three. Sorry, buddy, in him, and I
Uh,
wasn't sure if he was six
Hank,
or three.
are you just trying to hurt me? This is like I feel. What I mean,
You feel put into
well,
a
it is ironic,
box.
and that's why the show's so good. Nate starts out as probably, arguably, the most lovable character in season one
Mhm,
because you feel sorry for him
mhm.
and you're rooting for him, right? Without spoiler alert, right? You're just rooting for this guy to achieve, and he has a bunch of different pieces.
Yep.
And then he turns into it's like Darth Vader,
It's
right?
it's
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 almost that
actually
bad. It's almost that bad.
it's actually all throughout literature, all throughout history, where the protege seeks to kill the mentor.
Yes, this is Star Wars. I feel George Lucas and Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi. I mean, but you don't see it coming. I did not. I was again hit by the bus on that.
So that's where I'm getting into the loyalist piece because Um, loyalists are complicated. The name sounds a little more positive sometimes than it is because loyal, we say loyal and we think, oh, that's a good thing, right? But Nazis were loyal.
Right.
It depends what you're loyal to. You can be loyal to, you can be a KKK member. Like that's a terrible loyalty. You can be loyal to bad ideas, bad systems, bad operators, bad leaders.
Well, I think that they feel, and I don't know if this is right, but I think from what I've gathered from you, they feel most comfortable in a crowd. So part of it can be what crowd they end up in, right? So they want to be in the crowd. They're comfortable in a crowd, unlike a four, which is uncomfortable in a crowd, or
Correct.
maybe an eight wants to run the crowd, but the six wants to be in a crowd. Now, as you know, my father said when I was a kid, it depends what crowd you get into. But
Right.
if you're a loyalist, you want to be part of where you feel that. I mean, you can provide more insight, but you can see that at least in season one for Nate.
So yes, and it's a little more nuanced, of course, in that there are other types that really want to be in a crowd, in a group setting, like twos, for instance. Sixes grapple a little more with power. Sixes feel insecure. Remember, their core fear of a six is fear itself, is not belonging, is being left out in the Sahara, not part of the tribe and
Right.
not having a place. So we're in more of a realm of power versus two, which is more relationship. And now we're talking about power. Well, sixes are happy to follow, but they're also able to lead. So many presidents were sixes. Both the Bushes were sixes. Um, what's his name? I'm not a crook. Was a six.
Richard Nixon
Nixon.
was six? Yeah.
Nixon was a
You know,
six.
sixes are anxious a little bit, right? Is that
They
what
are,
I would have
because they're
thought? It's funny. I would have thought George Bush, W was more of a seven.
okay. But it isn't that they all express their anxiety as fear. They can go the opposite. So remember, there are
Okay.
two types of six. There's the phobic six.
Yeah.
An extreme example of the phobic six is Curb Your Enthusiasm. Larry David,
Oh yeah, Larry David.
Woody Allen,
Yeah,
neurotic.
Vladimir Putin.
Yeah. Well, so that's the other six. That's a counterphobic. So that's a
Yeah.
bravado. That's a
Yeah.
tough guy image to under. And I think GW is a counterphobic six.
Oh
So
really?
so
Okay.
instead of saying I'm going to embrace my fear and succumb it's I'm going to charge head first into the fire. Right? We're going to give it to you before you give it to
Hmm.
us. And in Vladimir Putin, same way. This KGB fear, anxiety, kind of neurotic. It could either be that you succumb and you just walk around in anxiety, or you become a tyrant, in that situation. And we know what Putin chose.
Well, I guess it's funny. Nate probably was a phobic six who turned into a counterphobic six. Maybe would that be correct
Yes,
analysis?
I think that there's a swing vote that happens in Nate,
Okay.
that he wants to belong. He's given his power to Ted, and then in the end of season 2, spoiler alert, he's um, disillusioned by Ted. He says Ted betrayed him somehow. And so what does he do? He then, spoiler alert, jumps to the other team, and he's now going to head coach the other team.
Yeah, I
So
can't wait to
he's,
season 3 now to see what happens.
yeah. And I considered at first putting him in the Achiever, but the Achievers tend not to have that vindictiveness.
Yeah, I don't see him. I think you've hit it exactly right.
Yeah.
Who
Um,
knew he'd be the deepest character in the whole place?
yeah, or it's certainly the most
The
complex.
most, or the most, the continuum was so the widest for him.
But that's true with sixes. They have the
Is it?
widest continuum
Okay.
because there's such an extreme difference between the counterphobic six tough
Yeah.
person and the anxious six. So, and then you look at Isaac as an example. He's a counterphobic six. He's a tough guy. He's like rough and tumble, but there's a fear, there's an anxiety underneath you can feel. Phoebe
Yeah.
just kind of felt
I think is
six.
six the most highly anxious group? I mean, number?
5, 6, and 7, the head types are all the anxiety types, but 6 feels it the most.
Okay.
They live in this constant state of anxiety or fear.
Yeah.
And like, look, as I say to sixes, they're probably right. We're all live on a rock in the middle of outer space, flying around a hot ball of fire called the sun, waiting to die. Like, life is freaking scary. Sixes just have a hard time compartmentalizing it. You and I compartmentalize it.
Yeah, no, I think it's true. I think sixes, you taught me a lot. It's the hardest for me to recognize. Also, the hardest for me to help people in my business when they're six, to deal with that anxiety and to help with it.
So whenever they mistype on a test or they don't know where they fit in, almost always I know they're sixes, because there's this like anxiety of becoming loyal to the wrong number. And this one looks good and this one looks good. And so
Yeah.
there's an anxiety. All right, moving from the sixes to the sevens, the enthusiasts. I think these ones are the most fun because they are the most fun. Sevens, tell us about sevens, Mick.
No, sevens are they're the life of the party. They're the happy people. They're positive and playful and lighthearted, and want to have a good time. Don't like pain, or probably you know don't like pain, or enthusiastic. Like you said, you call them the enthusiasts. I think of them as just motivated, enthusiastic, and they love the endorphins.
Yeah. Danny Rojas, soccer is life. Life is soccer, right? He's running around, just he's just a joy. Everybody loves being around him. He lifts everybody up. And yet he crumbles when he hits suffering. Remember when he hits the suffering?
Oh, I remember. Yeah, yeah. I won't spoiler alert that suffering because
Already
that makes
spoiled the whole
everyone
thing. Yeah.
sad. That could be the saddest moment in the show.
So
But
it almost crushed
yeah,
him.
these are people I think who want to avoid pain at all costs.
Yeah. Pains, emotional suffering,
Yeah.
stay at the surface. Again, unhealthy. I know many sevens who have really faced life, gone down into the depths, gotten deeper. But if they don't do the work, they look more like Peter Pan, the boy who doesn't want to grow up. And so Danny is light and easy, and then he hits this roadblock and it almost destroyed him. And then he comes out the other side of it, having done some deeper work, and he's a better person. And that's what I see with sevens. They can grow like no other type. Well, as an example, Vladimir Zelensky is a seven. 10 years ago, he was like a joke comedian, literally a jokester. Now he's leading
Yeah.
Ukraine against the fight against the unhealthy six, right? Huge growth.
Yeah, probably again, like he was probably a counterphobic seven. Now he's a phobic seven, now counterphobic seven, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, sevens in general are the least phobic on surface. So they pretend they're part of the anxiety phobic triad, but they try and outrun it, outpace it, outlaugh it, outdo it. And so people are always surprised when they find out people are sevens because they don't always look like sevens because they don't look anxious like sixes or brooding like fives. But when you get to know a seven, you really can see that underneath it's coming from an anxiety. So, example, Sassy. She's got a minor role in this, but every time you see her, she wants to be like the life of the party.
Just their name. I mean, they called it, right?
Exactly.
They like you can look at people's names sometime, right?
Yeah.
And almost predict what they are in the Enneagram sometimes.
So she's got this chutzpah piece, the
Sassy.
sassy piece, right?
They named her Sassy for a reason. Keely.
And
I
and you
mean,
can
his
feel
name.
like it's jokes. It's all jokes. It's all jokes. But underneath the surface, you can feel there's
Yeah,
something brewing.
right.
And
For
then
sure.
one of my favorites, Keely. Tell us about Keely Jones.
Well, she's like the social influencer. She
Mhm.
starts out as that. She's happy, upbeat, friendly, obviously dating Jamie initially, and kind of an unserious character initially. You kind of think of her as unserious. She becomes more important, more serious, as time goes on. Um, and she has some baggage kicking around in there. We eventually find out, to your point of maybe being enthusiastic, to mask some baggage.
Yeah, there's a fun lightheartedness that isn't so fun underneath the surface, which is oftentimes the case for sevens,
Right, right.
and especially sexual sevens. Sexual sevens are like the most future focused, the most animated, the most, like let's just go for it. And you can feel Keely really growing up in the show by standing still, not running away, not running off to La La Land, and really, like taking her life and her job seriously. And that's how a seven grows, taking on responsibility. So, yes. All right. Let's get to the remaining time we have eights, nines, and ones, the body type, the gut type. Who do we start with? I love all three of these characters.
I mean, my favorite character in that group is Roy Kent. I mean, he has to be the quintessential eight.
He's here. He's there. He's every fucking where. Roy
He is
Kent.
so intense. And when I think of an eight, you call them the challenger, but I call them the intense.
Yeah, that's
They
good.
are so intense, and intense in a way that also says, these are people who are so definite. They're definite, they're intense. There's a sense of control and a sense of it's power. You feel the power oozing out of these people.
And anger.
It could be, like I said, the fear is probably emanates maybe from anger, to some degree. They're not sevens in the sense that it's emanating from like they're happy. They're intense.
Yeah.
The power probably could be identified or manifest as anger, right? That it's not coming from a lighthearted place.
So, speaking as an eight on behalf of fellow eights, it's not that we're angry over about something. We're always angry. The question is what do we do with that? Do we channel it? or does it become a fire that consumes us? And Roy is the perfect example, because you can feel that fire is just consuming him, and it burns everybody and everything in his path until he starts to do his work. And what's
Yeah.
so interesting is the work of an 8 is to become more innocent, more simple, more childlike. Well, what is, you can feel his heart isn't Keely, as he falls in love with Keely later on, but his heart is Phoebe.
Oh no, his niece, right? I mean, it is. That's the part where you start to see the intensity change when he takes care of his niece that he loves,
It's
right?
his salvation.
It is a salvation, but he's like I said, he's the ultimate nuclear power plant.
Yeah, there's an intensity, a life force in an 8 like no other type, and
Yeah,
what depends what you
it's
do
the
with
brick.
it.
It's the brick wall people. It's like, okay, there's a brick wall. Who is running through it? The 8.
Which is
The 8.
great until, you run through brick walls that aren't meant to be run through, or they're not
Oh,
yours to
it
run
hurts.
through.
It hurts to
And,
run
and,
through.
and
But these are the people who are, no matter what you give them, there's no obstacle, right? That's
that's
just
right.
that. That's how I look at. Even like Roy is that way.
There's no stopping an 8 once they've set their sights on
Yeah,
whatever they've set it on,
yeah,
good or bad.
for
Um,
sure.
and so, Roy is one of the most interesting, I think, characters in this. I think he's one of the most important characters on the field, holding that team together, even after he's no longer talented. He's still the life force of that team. And that's what an 8 at their best can do. At the worst, there's a lot of destruction, a lot of cleanup that comes after a unhealthy 8, which we'll get to with Led Tasso. But first, May. May's kind of a side character, but she's always there, kind of shutting down the BS. Right? They just, an 8s have a sniffer for, sixth sense for BS,
Right.
and they just shut
Yeah.
it down.
Kind of matter of fact
Yeah.
in many ways. The politeness factor is not really part of it, right? It's just like, here it is.
And that's a good segue into Led Tasso. Tell us about Led Tasso.
Well, I guess Led Tasso is the alter ego, right?
Yeah.
So
He's so for anybody watching, Ted Lasso decides to, as we used to say back in the day, open up a can of whoop ass and go hard on the team. And he
yeah,
says, watch this. And he flips the switch and he becomes not Ted Lasso, but Led Tasso. And that's all 8. Well, what's interesting is look at the 2 and the 8 and that line. I see this with 2s all the time. They can look very 8ish if they're unhealthy, if they're not conscious, or when they want to be strong. I've seen it a lot in counseling 2s that go through divorce. They turn into Led Tasso.
yeah,
And it was like this helping, nurturing person all of a sudden becomes that like anger.
yeah. I think it seems like if you break a 2, or if 2 feels broken, they turn into that 8
Right.
to some degree. To, I don't know if it's to lash out or to gain control, but like you said, you can see that, right? But I'm not sure how long it can last. In Led Tasso, it only lasted.
Right.
It has a shelf life. They can't maintain it.
Versus Roy Kent.
Oh, Roy
Roy's
Kemp,
constant.
yeah, is always, he's never gonna. He's a, he's so far on the continuum that you might mute it, but Led Tasso has a few minutes of being 8, right, and then he can't sustain it.
It's not who they are, it's where they go to. That's why that line between 2 and 8 is called the stress line, because a
Right.
2 under stress looks like an unhealthy 8. Now, a 2 can do the work, become strong, and go to 8 a little more subdued and harnessed and become a very strong 8. And that's in a 2. But yeah, Led Tasso really shows you that alter ego of the 2. And okay, anything else on 8s, or should we look at Sam?
Sam's such a great character, isn't he?
So tell us about Sam and the Peacemaker.
Well, I think Sam is. I don't know if he's from. Was in Nigeria.
I think so.
He's a, probably one of the most talented, players on the team. He's a very happy guy, and he falls in love with, well, spoiler alert, with Rebecca, the one, and vice versa, which is, so interesting, because they're complete opposites in their demeanor.
They are in their demeanor, but underneath the surface, what's interesting is I couldn't decide if Sam was a 9 or a 7. Sometimes it's hard for me to tell because they are both light, But Danny felt more seven-ish because he felt more like he was doing it for fun, living his life for fun and experience. And Sam felt like he was really trying to keep the peace.
It could be because he does talk about his village. He talks about his country. He talks about a lot deeper stuff in the sense of he knows that he's representing something bigger in many ways, right? He doesn't want to offend, a lot or upset people.
So this is also a complex piece of the nines. People misunderstand that nines are peacemakers, meaning they're not able to fight, to make a stand, to be rough and whatever needs to happen for truth and justice. But that's not true. Obama, Reagan, Clinton, lots of great leaders have been nines. So but they're never as angry and fiery as the eights. But there's a fire underneath that's a little more harnessed. And you see it with Sam when he makes a stand for his country over abuses by the sponsoring company of his
Right.
soccer team.
Yeah.
He leads a rebellion.
Yeah. I think, it's funny because I try to, think about this as you do it and understand the nines a lot more because as you help me analyze the people around me, certainly in my life and business, who knew I have more nines than I thought.
Hmm.
So it makes me think a lot. I'm like, why is that? Or, how does it happen? People like Sam. I like to think of nines partially as peacemakers, but also people who like equilibrium. They just want balance between, things. They just don't want an equal amount of energy and lack of energy. Unlike an eight, which is, nuclear power, and a three, which kind of goes that way. So they just like the balance of things. They don't like things out of too much positive or negative energy.
And in that way, they're like a two. They don't always, they tend towards a supporting role. But Sam at the beginning of the show it's not that he's not a good soccer player. It's that he doesn't want to step into his power, into the limelight. And I think you're asking me why, or you didn't ask me why, but you referenced why there are so many nines in your life. I think partially because nines want to become more three-like and step onto the stage. So Sam becoming more like Jamie, stepping into that role. And threes want to become more nine-like, to be a little more peacemaker, a little more in it for the team, for other. So they have a lot to offer each other.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess, like you said, that's why they're connected, and but they seem to be seeking that balance,
Yes.
like you said. So it's very, very interesting. All of this is just so massively interesting.
So I guess one last one before we wrap up. Rebecca Welton. Let's debate it, because you said eight. Make the case for eight.
I'll make the case for eight. I want to say she is actually my favorite character.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll say that first, so maybe I'm biased, but she is the owner of the team who came out of the spot, from Rupert, and she does take charge. She does seem like she's in control, partially out of her circumstance. She's kind of dominating partially physically.
Mm-hmm.
She seems to be a great leader. At first, she seems like a harsh leader, but she turns into, I think, good leader who makes great decisions, who is meant to be in control of things and meant to lead. I think she does have excellent leadership skills, and I equate eights with excellent leadership skills.
So I would say that I thought she was an eight too, partially because eights get hell bent on revenge. And
You see, coming out of a Jack place there,
and that beginning of the show, it was all for her. It was all about getting revenge on her ex-husband Rupert, and then she morphs and becomes softer. But eights, nines, and ones agains are angry, and so there's an anger there. I think that definitively puts her in the action instinct triad. Now I moved her to one. I don't know if last minute, but in my process of making this, for a couple reasons. One is it's almost like she's not in touch with her anger. Like eights express their anger. Roy, right? I mean, he must drop the F-bomb 1,000 times during the show. And with Rebecca, there feels like this repressed anger. It's underneath the surface.
Yeah, I wondered for her if she was, if she was an eight before she was married, or the anger is coming because of her circumstances of the divorce.
Mm-hmm.
How those traumatic events trigger people and how it changes their enneagrams, or at what point, are you born or what, and when were you born an 8?
I think we are born our number, and I think we stay our number, but I think we can learn to get to the higher side of our number. We can start to access other numbers. We can really develop those
Right.
lines and those wings. So, the 8 is a possibility for her, but I also feel like she is so much more controlled than most 8s you see. I mean, look at May,
Yeah.
look at
Yeah.
Roy, look at Led. They blow up. Like I don't even think she
No.
wants to. She blow up.
I can see your point. For she's very traditional. She's
There's a
very
conservative
organized.
nature.
She's very, by the numbers. No, no, no question about that.
She's very rigid. Ones, I've seen this when I've gone to hug ones that like stiffen up a little bit like a
Oh yeah.
board
Yeah.
because you're
Yeah.
kind of in a strange territory for them. And a few times she really has a hard time with the intimacy, with the emotional connection, which I see with
Right.
ones.
Well, her mother's a 7, right? Maybe, or remember her mother?
Yeah,
I
maybe
don't know, her 7, or she's,
her father
some,
sounds abusive a little
right. The
bit. I'm not
father
sure.
was probably an 8 in the sense of maybe.
Maybe.
I don't know, but she definitely went through some trauma for
So I
sure.
think, yeah, so I think there's that just developing kind of a survival structure there's a control element with ones. You can feel like they're controlling the chaos of their life, like we talked about before.
Right, right. They like order. So I think that's so true.
So I guess we'll leave her as a 1. All
You're
right.
the expert.
Well, there's, I guess as we wrap up, there's no perfect place to put these folks. And Mick and I thought it would be fun to talk through the reasoning as much as just showing you a picture. And this is the reasoning. And you can make
Yeah.
a case for moving Rebecca over to the 8. I think that's the interesting part, is making the case.
And I think, when I looked at this, and you've helped me analyze my organization unbelievably, when I looked at the pictures of my organization, I found that people only fall into like 3 categories out of the 9,
Mm-hmm.
which is an insight for me to add different people over time into different categories. And why I think this show is so amazing is that when B just did this, there are people all over the Enneagram, so it's so holistic
Mm-hmm.
as a show because they cover everything. And I think if you probably look at a less successful show, you might find that they're missing pieces in the Enneagram. And
Yes.
part of the thing I'm realizing from what you've taught me is that all of these numbers have superpowers, as you put it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can get someone with their superpower in each one of these, you can build the best team.
That's right.
And that's what I'm looking to do as I add people to my life and to my business and other things. And why this is so important, because I'm like, as we know, I don't have a lot of 7s. I don't have necessarily a lot of 6s or 8s. So knowing that now, you're missing a lot of resources as a result, and the
So,
superpowers.
so I think it makes for an interesting show to have this kind of diversity. I think it makes
Yeah.
for a successful TV show, but a successful company. And I've been working with a few companies who are really plugging holes in their roster based on a slide, just like this that I make for their company, for you.
That's how you did it. You did the slide, and when I looked at the slide, I was like, oh my God, everyone is clustered into a few places. And I wonder why I'm not achieving what I want to achieve in certain other areas, because I don't have the right resources to do that. But at least
It's like trying to put a wide receiver into a linebacker role. Like
it
you got
is.
to know your players.
It is, but the visual of it, and I know you've done this with some of your business clients, which once you put this up and everyone realizes they're all, in the same category, and they wonder why they have people who aren't on the right seats on the bus, or there's one person when you need 4 in that area. You're like, oh, wow.
Or
It's
you're
a
trying to
wow
promote
moment.
or you're trying to promote a 4 into a job that they don't do. It's not what
That's
they
right.
do.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Um,
This is, I always think of this as your best slide that you've created in the system. Uh, this slide summarizes everything. And when you look at it, you can just see so much. I love this. That's why this was so great with Ted Lasso. But I think, for the listening audience, and when you need assistance in doing things, B has 3 or 4 slides that are sublime. They're just amazing. When you look at it, it tells you everything you need to know in one spot. I think this one could be one of the top 3 for sure. Maybe even the best one.
Yeah, it's been amazing. We'll do a whole talk on a show on this, you and I, about diversity. But I've sat down with a couple companies that thought they were diverse because of skin color and sexual orientation and religion and all these great things that we need to make sure we are addressing as a society. And then we looked at the slides and it didn't show diversity. They were all 7s. They all
Right.
thought like 7. Every single person in that particular organization thought like a 7. And then we have no diversity because we're thinking all like 7s. We have no 5s, we have no 6s, and there's no
Right.
room at our table.
Yeah, and clearly, certain occupations and job types need different personalities.
That's right. And it's just like whether you're a company or whether you're an individual, are you willing to take a hard look at yourself? Like this company I'm working with, they're amazing. I won't say their name, but they're amazing. And they said, we want to start addressing this pain point because we want to make sure 5s and 6s have a place at our table, both for them, because we want to give them opportunity, but for us, so we can grow as a company. And whether it's a company or an individual or a family, I do this for families, this is an opportunity for us to look at this as a mirror and then to really start making adjustments based on what we're seeing. Do we like it? Do we not like it? And it takes a lot of courage. So,
No, I think that's what is so great about this, is identifying what I, like to think of the gaps. And do you need to identify, do you need to address it?
well, I think the Ted Lasso and the Enneagram of TV shows is a great way for us to mix up our very deep and important conversation around investor types, but we also want to have some fun and bring it to real life. So hopefully we accomplish that. I think we did.
No, I mean, I said you deserve the Nobel Prize in this for sure.
Enneagram. Thank you. You're very kind, Mick. It's a
You're
pleasure
welcome.
working with you and bringing this to our audiences.
No, it's amazing.
So thank you for tuning in, everybody. We'll probably be back to the regular scheduled program on the next one, where we'll be diving into, I think we're up to Enneagram 6. You can get all 5 of the previous types as individuals and as investors, 2 different podcasts. And we look forward to many, many more Enneagram conversations with you. Until then, defy your number and live your spirit. See you, Mick.
Yay. See you, B.